Hello and welcome to Off the Fence Stories. This is a very special mini-series of the Off the Fence podcast where every Friday for the next few weeks, we're going to bring you stories of people who have gone through a divorce and not only survived, but have gone on to thrive afterwards. Real people, real stories, and hopefully real inspiration. If you enjoy this series, please do me a big favor and let me know. This is honestly a bit of an experiment, and if enough people love it, we'll keep doing it. But in order to know whether you want more stories, you've got to let us know what you think. So leave a comment wherever you're watching or listening. And now, let's get to our story. Enjoy. With me today, I have a bit of an unusual guest. The name she's known by is Mia Hanks, and she is a survivor of narcissistic abuse. Mia was married to a covert narcissist for 29 years, and in 2024, she published an award-winning memoir titled Bridemaid, and you can see the cover of the book here on the screen today. By appearing on this podcast and sharing her story, Mia is hoping that she can spread awareness about narcissism and help other victims find their voices. Mia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am excited to have you and excited to hear about your story. So let's just dive in and start there. How did this journey begin for you?
It began many years ago. I was 21 years old when I got married, and I think I was quite naive. I had come from a very sheltered background, and I didn't know about narcissism. I didn't know such a thing existed, and so I certainly wasn't on the lookout for it. And before I knew it, newly married, and I was kind of, I just sort of got engrossed in this relationship, and a couple of kids came along, and I felt stuck, and I knew I wasn't happy, a good way into my marriage, but I just felt like there wasn't anything I could do about it. And so, yeah, I remained stuck for quite a lot of years.
So let's go back. You said you got married, you were what, 21?
21, yes.
How long had you known your husband before you got married?
I had known him for 2 years.
And during that time, were you dating the whole 2 years or you just
We
knew him?
were,
Okay.
yeah, we dated for 2 years, and yeah.
So, what was that like? Because obviously, you're here today to talk about the end of your relationship, and we will get to that, and how your husband turned out to be a covert narcissist. But I'm sure, like you said, you were naive. You didn't know that in the beginning. So, tell me, what was your courtship like? What was he like?
Well, he fits the bill for the typical narcissist. He is a textbook narcissist. And like most, he began this relationship with love bombing, and that is something that all narcissists will do. It's over the top attention, it's grand gestures, wonderful gifts, too good to be true. And that's kind of what I experienced. It was this love bombing stage. And of course, I didn't know about love bombing. And it all looked great to me. It looked like here's a guy that's just crazy about me, and how can this be a bad thing? He's setting himself up for great success in life. He's smart, he's got it all together, and he's showering me with attention and gifts and wonderful things. And so yeah, that's really what the courtship looked like.
So, was he able to sustain that love bombing for 2 whole years?
Uh, you know, Mostly, but I do look back, and I mean, of course, it came in phases, but I do look back, and I was seeing some narcissistic traits. I just didn't didn't know what they were. I was seeing that lack of empathy. He truly could not see things from other people's perspectives, and he really couldn't feel for someone genuinely. And I was seeing that, but again, I thought, well, it's a personality quirk, he'll grow up, whatever. And I just kind of ignored it.
So, I don't know. I don't want you to give away too much because I know that you're trying to keep your identity from coming out. So please tell me if I overstep. But what I am curious about is looking backwards from where you sit now, knowing about narcissism and knowing about a covert narcissist, you can say, yeah, I saw a lack of empathy. But what did that look like? Because whatever it was at the time wasn't enough to like throw up red flags for you, or at least not red enough flags to make you go, ooh, I don't know if I want to do this. So when you say you saw little bits of lack of empathy, what were you noticing?
I think more, earlier on, it was just I could sense that he couldn't really put himself in someone else's shoes. I just didn't sense that there was a genuine concern for other people, although he can put on a good show. But it just something didn't feel completely genuine to me. And the other thing that I noticed early on, and it kind of all ties in with that empathy thing, was that he had to be the center of attention. Everything had to be about him, for him. It was all about if he was having fun, if he was having a good time, and how things made him feel. And so, yeah, it was very much centered on him all the time. Again, I didn't see that as a bad thing necessarily, more of just kind of quirky. I wrote a lot of the stuff off as just being quirky because it wasn't affecting our relationship enough that it would be, like you say, a huge red flag. It was just things I noticed, but just didn't think it was that big of a deal. And again, that was just me being naive.
Yeah. Did you feel at the time, did you feel like he had empathy for you?
I did. I did. I thought he genuinely cared about me. And I don't think he did. Looking back, I think it was just all a show. Because not long after we got married, things were that empathy just got a little bit less and a little bit less. And I noticed early on, for example, if I were to get sick, if I had the flu or something, rather than being sympathetic toward me or trying to help me or feel bad that I was feeling bad, his reaction would be to be angry with me because I was sick. Because you see, it inconvenienced him. It just wasn't on his agenda for that day. And again, it's all about him. So I did notice that. I mean, that kind of thing started very, very early in the marriage. And you know, we're married and I'm young and I'm eager to make this work. And so like all these little things, I just kind of sweep it under the rug and say, well, it'll get better. It'll get better in time.
So what else did you see? So this man comes, he looks, too good to be true. He's showering with you with attention and gifts. You get married. Then take us through what happened after that. You saw that, for example, when you were sick, he didn't respond with any kind of true, genuine caring. What else started to happen? How did the fairy tale start to unravel?
It kind of was a slow process. I mean, I think narcissists are very calculating and it's not overnight, it doesn't all fall apart. It's sort of like a snowball effect. And really, the more they get away with, the bolder they become. And so that's what I experienced. But yeah, that lack of empathy, I noticed that he started to get more and more controlling, very controlling of my attention and my time. He really didn't like me spending time with people other than him. He was just very much, everything was about him. So if I couldn't be happy unless he was happy, and it just became this dynamic that I fell into. And I learned it became my normal, I learned to live that way. Well, he comes first, his happiness comes first. We do what he wants to do. And I can only be happy if he's happy because if he's not happy, he makes everyone miserable. So you become almost a slave to this person's, what they want. And it's a difficult life. But again, I was young and it became my normal. And I didn't like it, but it just became the way it was. It was all about him. And I just, I kind of gave up.
Now, how long were you married before your kids came along?
I think about 7 years. It was quite a long time. Yeah.
So in that time period, were you working outside the house?
I worked just a little bit, like maybe the first 2 years we were married, and then no, I was not working. I was
Okay.
home. And and I think that definitely I was not real happy in my marriage, obviously, before my kids came along. But I sort of had that thought that, well, maybe after we have kids, he'll get better. And of course, I mean, very naive thinking and just really not understanding what I was dealing with. Yeah.
So, you've mentioned a few times about him being a covert narcissist. That's how you refer to him. What do you mean by covert narcissist as opposed to just a regular narcissist?
Yeah, so, a narcissist, I mean, they all have the same agenda, basically. Everything's about me. But the covert, they're considered one of the more dangerous types because to the outside world, these people appear generous and kind and empathetic, and just such wonderful all-around people. They're oftentimes thought of as being very humble. They're very generous, and oftentimes they like to play the victim as well. But behind closed doors, they're a complete, like, what you would think of a narcissist. They're manipulative, they're controlling, they're self-centered. Everything has to bow before them. Um, and so the covert, they're very dangerous because the victim oftentimes can't garner a lot of support. Because everyone else just sees this great guy. I mean, this is father of the year, husband of the year. How could he be bad? So it puts the victim in a very tough position because then you start to think, well, everybody else thinks he's great. Maybe it's just me.
So, is that kind of how your husband was? Like everybody on the outside thought he was person of the year.
Yeah, more or less, I would say. Um, and I think that kind of was illustrated after our divorce and in the whole smear campaign that the narcissists will always engage in. Most of our mutual quote unquote friends went to his side. And they couldn't believe, I guess, that he was really a not a great guy. So yeah, I think they people genuinely did feel like he was pretty great.
How did your family feel about him?
They were concerned straight away. They saw things they didn't like very in the very beginning. My parents were the only people that really got a good inside look at what was going on in our house. And yeah, I mean, they definitely had great concerns and talked to me about it through the years. And like the perfect narcissistic victim that I was, I my response every time was to defend him. I defended him. I held up for him, just like I did, in any event where I thought he was being attacked. I would be his defense, and I would say, "Oh, he has this stressful job, and he's not usually like this, and it'll get better." And yeah, I just held up for him.
Did his image or facade or whatever you want to call it to the outside world, did that crack in any other places? I mean, I know you saw a very different human when he was home, but did it start to at any time affect his work or his other relationships with friends if he had any? Did it like were you the only victim or was he victimizing somebody else too?
I don't think he was. He has a lot of acquaintances, but at the time we were married, he really didn't have any friends. And I think that's not uncommon for a narcissist. He really didn't have any true friends, I don't think. I mean, it seemed a bit superficial. As far as it affecting his work or anything like that, it didn't seem to. He seemed to be able to wear that mask really well, to that outside world. And so I do believe, yeah, I was his only victim.
So here he is. You've been married 7 years. He looks like husband of the year. You're kind of seeing that things aren't exactly as he portrays them to everyone else. Along comes your children. Did the relationship change when you had children?
Um, yeah, I mean, it just further deteriorated, because now we're bringing kids into the mix, and narcissists are often jealous of their own children. And he was no exception to that. You know, he was jealous of the time I spent with my kids. And so it created a very difficult dynamic. And probably at that point, I just sort of went into this day-to-day survival mode, you know, and trying to please everybody and keep everybody happy. And it was a tough job. He would like to kind of pit me against my kids, you know, and sort of make me choose like who's more important, you know, and he was very jealous of his kids. And I don't know that he is now. Because now I'm not in the picture, but yeah, when they were growing up, it was tough. I felt spread very thin.
And so you went along like in that manner for how long?
Well, yeah, I mean, until my kids both got out of high school, and then at that point I left.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me ask you a question. Did you know that you were going to leave before your kids graduated high school? In other words, were you just waiting for them to graduate so that you could get out on purpose? Or did things just, you had enough at that point?
You know, I don't think I had any like hard plans to leave. I knew that I wanted to, but my feeling was I'm stuck here and I've been in this marriage for so long and I'm so invested in this and there's no way out. And what would people think, right? After this many years and you worry about there's an embarrassment factor. And how would I even begin to tell people why I left? Because who's going to believe me? Um, I definitely wanted to leave. And then, of course, you've got to think about the kids and, you know, the whole idea of sharing custody. I could not wrap my head around that. And so, yeah, I think it just everything fell into place after the kids got out of school. And I just, you know, I had a basically the situation arose that I felt like I could get out, and I sort of just took the chance when I saw it. But no, I don't think I had really been planning it. I wanted to, but didn't think I would ever get the opportunity to.
Tell me about your financial situation at that point. Were you the stay-at-home mom even as your kids were going off to school, to
Yes.
college?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So,
so, you know, here I am. You know, I had worked a little bit very early in the marriage, and I had been at home and he was the breadwinner, obviously. He made all the money and he controlled all the money. So, you know, that's another factor as far as it's not that easy to pick up and leave when and I didn't realize that I was the victim of financial abuse, which is something else that narcissists will do. I didn't realize it because you know I had my little debit card and I had access to the daily checking account, and I you know I my husband is a very wealthy man, and you know I had my little debit card and I could basically buy whatever I wanted. You know, I wasn't a big spender anyway, but I had anything I wanted. So financial abuse seemed preposterous. You know, no, I'm not being financially abused until I left, and then everything you know it all came to light, and I realized I don't have access to anything. So yeah,
what
that was eye-opening.
what do you mean when you say you don't have access to anything? Or, once you left it, you started to see the financial abuse. What exactly, I guess, what do you mean by financial abuse, and what did you see when you left that you didn't see while you were there?
So, you know, he has all these accounts and all this, you know, he has a lot of wealth. I didn't realize that I can't access any of it. I mean, he has everything fixed to where only he can access the big money, the big accounts. I have my debit card and my access to the day-to-day checking account, which is just our daily expenses, you know. But like big expenses, that would come from another account which I can't access. And so, and interestingly enough, I didn't even have a credit card. Now, I didn't question it at the time, because you know I was just doing fine with my debit card. But I never questioned it. And I left and I moved in with my parents, you know, and we're having this discussion about I need to get a lawyer. Well, where's that retainer going to come from? Because divorce attorneys are not cheap. And not only did I need did I need a lawyer, I needed a good lawyer, right?
Right.
Because I'm going to be up against it's going to be a fight. And so to be able to retain an attorney, it was like, well, how am I going to do that? Because, you know, the day-to-day checking account ain't going to cover attorney's fees. Well, I can't access any money, from any other account. So I didn't realize, but I believe, purposely set things up that way because
Yeah.
it really like prevents me from leaving him. It prevents me from being able to get my own place. How am I going to, if I want to get an apartment, how am I going to do that? I got to show pay stubs. I've got to show proof of income. I've got to do all this stuff. I don't have any of that. How would I pay the rent out of the just the little daily checking account? How do I get a lawyer to file for divorce? So he has me blocked, or so he thinks, at every turn, that I'm really stuck financially. Fortunately, my parents were able to help me out in this interim stage. But yeah, financial abuse is real, and I think a lot of times women don't realize it.
Yeah, I think, for those people who are out there listening and perhaps wondering, I wonder if that's the situation that I'm in. I don't care who you are or what your situation is. In this day and age, you should have credit cards. I mean, I interviewed someone who had no access to any cash. I mean, she could basically buy groceries, and that was it. Never had a credit card, no checking account, no nothing. And when she left, she had no credit history. She couldn't, I mean, to your point, how do you get an apartment when she had no credit rating. Her credit rating was zero.
Right. I mean, and the funny thing is, as I later found out when, he has to turn over all this financial information for the divorce, I had a credit card, but he held it. I mean, he didn't give it to me. And not that he was worried that I was going to go out and, be a big spender, because I'm just by nature I'm not. He did not give it to me because it was a control thing. If I had a credit card, it just gave me some freedom, and he didn't want me to have that freedom. He kept a very tight rein, and I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I had it made. It was all good. And I never dreamt that he had those financials set up the way he did. And it was pretty disheartening because then you think, well, how long has he been kind of planning for this, impending catastrophe? I mean, this has been in the back of his mind that I might leave him one day. And he was completely set up for it. He was ready.
What do you mean when you said say he was completely set up for it? I mean, did he have all the accounts were only is in his name? Were you like how? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so everything was basically in his name. Yeah. And it was just, he had things set to where, he had trust accounts and all this stuff. And he was careful not to commingle any of these accounts, such that if there was ever a divorce, I couldn't touch that stuff. There's certain things that are not on the table in a divorce. And so he was very careful to keep, quote unquote, his money completely separate from our money, never commingling, so that I would never have an outlet to get into his bigger accounts. So I think he was always protecting himself,
Yeah.
and and like I say, everything was basically in his name. And I mean, we did have joint accounts, but I would had to have contacted his financial broker to access those accounts. And the minute I do that, that broker's going to call him and say, "Hey, that his broker was very loyal to him." And so I wasn't even going to go there. But yeah, he had it. He was very secure in how he had his finances set up so that I couldn't file for divorce and, take half of what he had. There was no chance that was going to happen.
Did he come from money?
He did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you, he made sure that the money that he inherited or got from wherever it came from, that that was separate, so it was never considered marital property, correct?
Exactly. He was very careful with the whole marital property thing. It didn't even cross my mind, but it was clearly on his mind all the time, and making sure not to commingle anything. And so basically what he did is all the money that he spent, even for himself, he used quote unquote our money to do that. He would never touch his money. And so yeah, it worked out well for him in the end.
So I'm curious, you were in this marriage for decades. Um, what finally was the tipping point? What prompted you to leave? You said you had an opportunity and you took it. What, can you tell me a little more about what happened?
Yeah, my physical health was failing so drastically, just living under the stress and the fight or flight mode, that I was living under. I was suffering from chronic pain, panic attacks, headaches, stomach aches, I mean, you name it. And I was literally falling apart. Um, and it just everything kind of came together. My kids both graduated. Um, we decided that we were going to downsize our home. And again, I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe this could be a new beginning for us, right? Maybe things will get better. Of course, I've been telling myself this at this point for like 27 years. But I'm thinking, okay, maybe a move, maybe this will be good. So we decided to downsize and we sold our home. And it was really in that moment that things just got so bad because, it's stressful moving, selling a house. And when his stress level got up, he got orders of magnitude worse with his behavior. So he was just, at an all-time horrible state in his behavior. My health was falling apart. Our kids had both graduated, and it just seemed like I gotta go. I got an opportunity, and we've just sold the house, and I'm out from under that, and I think I've just got to go, and that's what I did.
And so you moved in with your parents. What was his response or reaction?
Well, I didn't really tell him I was leaving. I more or less just told him that I needed a break. The selling the house and all of this, we'd had all this stress, and and so I said, I just need a mental break. I'm really not doing well. Of course, he didn't care. But I said, I'm going to stay with my parents for a little bit and just clear my head. And I knew that I wasn't coming back, but I didn't tell him that because I was scared. I was petrified of what his response would be. And at first he was, he kind of ran hot and cold. He would be mean, and he'd be try to be nice and try to get me to come back. And then he just went back and forth. But when he discovered that I just was not going to come back, then yeah, he got very, very vengeful at that point, and started draining the bank account and all kinds of crazy stuff. In an attempt to show me, hey, if this is what's going to happen if you don't come back to me.
How did you know he was draining the bank account?
Well, he stopped making deposits into that account. And so,
Okay.
I would check the balance and it'd be like, $50. And I thought, what in the world is going on? Well, he was trying to keep that account because it was the only account I had access to. He was keeping it as low as he possibly could. Because he thought, well, hey, if I can't buy groceries and I can't feed myself, maybe I'll have no choice but to come back to him. And, that didn't work because my parents stepped in and said, we'll handle your financials until you get going on this divorce. So that's what we did.
So how long, I'm curious, how long was it between when you left to move in, you moved in with your parents and the time you actually filed for divorce?
I waited a year to file for divorce.
Ooh.
Yeah. And, people around me were saying, don't give him this long. Just don't do it because you don't know what he's doing behind the scenes. And I was still living in a fog, and I said, no, I think he'll be fair. And, yeah, it'll all be okay. But it took me a year. I was in therapy for a year. And it did. It took that long for me to get up the courage, really, to file those papers. It was a scary thought. And everyone around me that was trying to advise me and I wasn't listening to them, they were exactly right. He was moving money, he was doing all kinds of stuff. So when I hit him with those papers, he was ready to go.
So in that time period, what happened with your children? I mean, what did you tell them? I'm just staying with grandma and grandpa?
Yeah, I mean, I did in the beginning. I told them that, and they knew there was obviously some tension. But as time went on, I did tell them I'm gonna file for divorce. And it was interesting. They were actually very happy for me. They both have a relationship with their father, even today, of course. I mean, he's their dad, but they fully understand who he is. And they understand now, what I was living through. And they were glad. In fact, my oldest told me, she said, "Wow, I wish you had done this like 15 years ago." And I said, well, I do too, but hindsight is 2020. And, I thought I was making the right decision to keep the family together. And in retrospect, it was not the best decision, but I thought it was. But no, my kids have been very supportive from day one, and I've been really lucky.
They actually, you are really lucky because I know a lot of what will happen in a lot of situations. If you had left and your children were younger, then the narcissist tries to triangulate and separate you from the children and pit one person against the other, and it can be even uglier. So it's good to know that at least you kept your relationship with your kids, and that's huge.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, they struggled growing up. They struggled to have a relationship with their father. So even had they been younger, I think I still would have maintained that relationship, although he would have tried to triangulate. He likes to do that. But they always had a strained relationship with him. And so I guess, in some manner that helped me when I did leave because they understood why I was leaving. And being older, I could have these discussions with them, and of course, couldn't have done that when they were younger. So, it did make it easier, the fact that they were not minor children.
Okay, so you leave at some point, a year later you file. I'm curious, at what point in your journey did you realize that your husband was a narcissist?
It was around the time that I had decided I was going to have to leave, and I started doing a lot of research. I was just things were falling apart so rapidly. I was so miserable, and I just started doing research on, thinking maybe this isn't me. Maybe this is him. And this is like 27 years into the marriage. I'm just starting to think maybe I'm not the problem. And I just start Googling things like toxic relationships and, just trying to figure out what's wrong with my marriage. And I came across narcissism, and it was like, it changed my life. It really did. In that moment, it was like, this is what I have been dealing with. And all of a sudden, I had all this validation that it's not me, it's him. I mean, every box checked. And it was like I had answers to all these things that never made sense. The past, 20 some odd years, everything finally made sense to me. So, yeah, it was right about the time that I was leaving, and it all just kind of came together, and I finally had a name for what I had been living with.
Okay, so you figure it out, or you start to figure it out. You leave. A year later, you file for divorce. Then what happens? Tell me about how the divorce was. How long did it take? How much did it cost? Was it ugly? Was it peaceful? Was it what happened?
The divorce took a year, or just under a year, which,
That's
I
not
guess
bad.
for a high conflict divorce, it wasn't terrible. Um, I, you know, it was stressful, of course. We went complete no contact, which great, that worked out well. But yeah, it was ugly. I mean, like I say, he kept that bank account as low as he could. Of course, we had to put some parameters in place once I filed, and he was required to make such and such deposits into that account so that I would have enough money to buy groceries and that sort of thing. But yeah, just when all his financials came to light, and I saw how little control I had over things and how my name wasn't on things, and it was disheartening. It really was. But the divorce, I mean, I survived it. It didn't turn out like I thought. As far as expenses, yeah, it was very expensive. Divorces are, I didn't realize how expensive divorces were.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, tens of thousands of thousands of dollars. Um, but I needed a good attorney, and I feel like I was well represented. I had to bring extra people onto my team, just to feel like I was completely covered. One thing I did, a friend recommended to me, and I had never considered this, and it was probably the best decision I made. But a friend told me, you know, you should really get a tax attorney. And I thought, that seems strange, but okay, because I trusted him, and he's actually an accountant. And I said, okay, I think I'll do that. And so I reached out, and I brought a tax attorney onto my team. And it was like a second set of eyes. And I feel like, financially, the divorce did not turn out like I thought it would. But I feel like gave my best effort by going the extra mile and bringing on this tax attorney, and he was able to help tremendously in one area, which was the innocent spouse document. I had never heard of that, and I came into this divorce really not understanding divorce, I have to say. Um, Basically, he drafted up a document that stated, if my ex-husband ever gets in any kind of tax trouble for hidden accounts, hidden money, who knows what, I am innocent. And it took some doing to get him to sign that document. But finally, we had to revise the language multiple times, but he finally did sign it. And that really gives me a lot of peace of mind, I thought that was worth the money that I paid to the tax attorney, if nothing else, just to get that signature on that document.
Well, you said a couple of times now that the divorce didn't turn out financially like you thought it would. What do you mean by that?
I thought I was going to, again, being naive, I thought we just were going to split the money 50-50. And it doesn't work that way. So basically the bit that he had cordoned off that was quote unquote community property, and that's what he had been doing this whole year, is shifting stuff around. And so he got that community pool as low as he could. And in a divorce, you split the community property.
Right.
So 50%, that was a joke. I mean, thinking that I was going to get 50% of his money. That it didn't work that way. So I got, a little over 50% of the community, which is fine. I mean, I'm good. It's all good. It's just the idea, the idea of the actual percent, if you consider his net worth, and some of that money that I helped him build, being the stay-at-home mom and raising his kids so he could go out and work. And a lot of that money did not end up in the community pool. So, I understand trust and I understand inheritance and all of that, whatever, but there's still a lot of money that was not in those two categories that somehow disappeared from the community pool. So yeah, it just gets very complicated, and I came out good. I can't complain. I can just say it wasn't fair.
At the end of the day, were you able to settle your divorce or did you have to go all the way to trial?
We settled. We went to mediation, and we did our mediation via Zoom. So we were in two separate buildings. We weren't even in the same building. Um, it was a 10-hour mediation.
Oh,
Yeah, it was brutal. And, we thought about going to court at the end of those 10 hours. We really did. The settlement that he was agreeing to it just wasn't fair. So at the last minute, my lawyer and I were sitting at the table, and we pulled out a calculator and we started calculating, okay, how much is it going to cost us to go to court? You know, and we looked at the extra legal fees and the extra time and all of this. And then, my lawyer was telling me, I think, here's the max percentage that a judge is going to award you. And when we figured up all the numbers, it wasn't going to pay out. I mean, yeah, I would have come out with more money, but I would be spending more money, and it was a wash in the end. So we ended up settling for less than we wanted, but you know, she didn't feel like a judge was going to award me enough more than it would make sense, you know? So yeah.
Right. How did you feel, just out of curiosity, how did you feel about the single day mediation? It's what I call marathon mediation. And I'm just curious because there are lots of ways you can do mediation, and more people are going to this full day marathon thing. How did you experience that? Would you recommend that to other people, or would you say break it up in chunks?
I didn't mind the marathon. I did not want to give my ex and his attorney, who really was kind of a narcissist himself. I mean, they were kind of like the room was a little small for both of their egos. Um, I really didn't want to give them like overnight to regroup and re-strategize. I
Okay.
mean, I think they would have tried to pull more strings and, do more shady stuff if they had, if they saw where we were, what we were asking for, and then they could go and re-strategize all night long and come back with who knows what craziness. So, I felt like the one day was most beneficial. I mean, obviously it's in and another narcissistic tactic. They like to wear you down. And my ex-husband would he loved to do this. He would give me 3 and 4 hour lectures and just try to wear me down so that I would just say, okay, fine, you win. And so I think that was kind of his end game here, just draw it out, 10 hours, thinking I would just give up. And kind of I did, but we were calculating and we figured out all the numbers, and it just made sense to settle.
So, looking back now with the benefit of hindsight, with all you've been through, looking back at your younger self, what would you have counseled yourself to do?
I think just um, be more aware of the nuances in a relationship. That and I think that the biggest message I would give my younger self is you do not have to please everybody. That's I think that's cost me a lot of peace of mind, thinking that I have to please everybody. And it's taken me a lot of years to realize that you don't have to.
And just out of curiosity, how is your health?
Uh, you know, 2 weeks after I left, I saw the biggest change in my health. I felt like a new person. And it just gave me that much more validation that I cannot live in that environment. I cannot live under that stress, walking on those eggshells, you know, high anxiety, tense all the time. My body was so tense all the time. So yeah, 2 weeks later, I felt like a new person. And today I don't think I resemble who I was then. I actually take care of myself. I take time for myself. I listen to myself. I get enough rest. I do the things I need to do to make sure I'm well. So it's a nice change.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like you have come full circle and are back to being you again.
I feel like it. Yeah. I mean, it's been a long, long journey, but I wouldn't, I don't regret leaving for even a second. I have not missed the lifestyle even for one. I mean, not for a second have I missed anything about the lifestyle. Um, and yeah, so I mean, I know I made the right decision.
That's awesome. So, okay, if people are interested in your story, if they're interested in your book, if they'd like to learn more, where's the best place that they can find you?
So my book is available on Amazon and also online, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, all those places. It's available in ebook and paperback format. And then I have a website, miajhanks.com, and there's a link on that website that will take you to Amazon to purchase.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening or watching, everything will be linked in the show notes, so it will be nice and easy for you to access and find Mia. Mia, thank you so much for sharing your story. And if there's one thing you could leave people with, young women with especially, what would you say to them?
I would say, if you're in one of these types of relationships or marriages, and you feel like you're stuck, because that's certainly how I felt, just know that you're not stuck. I mean, no matter how long you've been in that relationship, if you need to get out, you absolutely can get out. There are resources, there's help available, and you're never stuck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for those of you out there who are listening or watching, if you enjoyed today's episode, if you'd like to hear more episodes just like it, do me a favor. Give this episode a thumbs up. Leave a comment. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.